Hi everyone, I'm Wendy Muse, creator of the Left Pocket Project, which brings you the history of leftists of color, one swipe at a time. And this is the Left Pocket Project podcast. Before I get on to today's episode, I just wanted to remind everyone that if they're interested in learning more about the Left Pocket Project, they can check us out on social media by typing in Left POC, and that's LEFT POC. We're on Twitter, Facebook, SoundCloud, you name it, we're on it. And you should definitely check out our Patreon page, and that's Patreon/LeftPOC, LEFTPOC, of course. And there you can find free books, lots of articles, of course, our podcast in full. We like to keep everything free and nothing behind a paywall, precisely because we believe in the democratization of history, of knowledge, and certainly of leftism. So with that said, I just wanted to get on with the show. On this episode, I speak with activist and journalist Jacqueline and Abdus Luqman. The Luqmans are purveyors of politics, social commentary, current events, and a little bit of entertainment. They're primarily focused on Black liberation and Pan-Africanist principles. In other words, unity among African and African-descended peoples in the United States and in the diaspora. The Luqmans are also unapologetic socialists, believing in the need for strong working class and poor solidarity to combat racism, sexism, transphobia, and to dismantle capitalism and the imperialism and militarism that are its outcomes. They believe in building a new society by addressing the issues of race and class, not one or the other, because they are used interchangeably in the system of oppression that we've been fighting for 400 plus years. They're students of history and believe a constant examination thereof is key to these endeavors. They are also Christians and find no conflict between Christianity and Black liberation and Pan-Africanism. They find no need to denigrate any spiritual belief to pursue these principles. They believe that all faiths focus on freedom. And last but not least, of course, the Luqmans are all about that revolutionary life, and they will never not be. So anyway, with that said, I really enjoyed this interview. I thought it was a great discussion. Unfortunately, Richard couldn't join us, but he wished he could be here. I'm sorry to the fans who I know love Richard, but he'll be back for the next few episodes. But in the meantime, sit back, relax, and listen to this wonderful episode. I really had a great time interviewing Jacqueline and Abdus, and I hope you all enjoy the talk. Thank you both for being here with me. I really appreciate it. And as I mentioned in the intro, unfortunately, Richard couldn't join us, but he wishes he could be here because he was really excited about talking to you all. But maybe we will have you all back on again to hopefully continue our discussion about Black politics, Black activism, and socialism, which you all seem to be quite involved in. I wanted to ask you first just how you met, because you all seem to have a really great dynamic on your show, Luqman Nation. And I'm curious about your backgrounds and sort of like how you two came together as both activists and journalists as well.
It's funny when people ask us this story because it's always still so amusing to both of us. We met at a Christian singles conference. Yeah, neither one of us actually wanted to be there, to tell you the truth. But he was there because he has a CDL license, and he was the only person in his church group that could drive the bus for the singles ministry to get there. And I was there. And the only reason he was going to go was because somebody had already paid for their ticket. So the ticket was paid for. So he like had no reason not to go.
Right.
And
the person that paid for the ticket and they couldn't go at the last minute.
Wow.
Yeah. And the only reason I was there was because my good friend was starting the singles ministry in our church, which I wasn't really all that interested in. But we hadn't spent any time together for a while. We were both really busy. And, you know, she was like, this would be a great opportunity for us to just hang out. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. All right, okay, I'll go. And was convinced that it would just be horrible the whole weekend. And there he was. Every day I went into the cafeteria for a meal. He was sitting at the first table, right in front of the doors, and his was the first face that I saw. And he smiled, and he has a beautiful, beautiful smile. And I thought, crap, I'm in trouble.
Well, that's a very sweet way to have met, but it happens to also be a good point of segue, because I know that you have mentioned, Jacqueline, that you used to be involved in the punk scene. Is that right?
Yeah.
So if you, so that's why I was like, maybe the Christian singles thing doesn't work out. But at the same time, you often talk about on the show, on Luqman Nation, and I believe as well on some of the stuff that you've done for the Real News, you all have both discussed the need for leftism to kind of be mindful of people who are Christian or religious, and sort of that being perhaps a potential disconnect for some leftists. If you all could talk about that as well, and kind of like how do we as leftists pay better attention to and be more attuned to these cultural differences, while at the same time not losing some of the more, like humanist principles of leftism that don't really relate directly to formal religion, I should say.
I think that one of the things that, what happens so much on the left, with respect to religion, is that there's a tendency to kind of assume that everyone who believes in a higher power is somewhat, either stupid, or they're lost. They don't have a grip on reality,
mm-hmm.
or they're not as enlightened, and that's just totally, not true. I think that one of the reasons why the right has been so successful, the so-called right, and the reason why Republicans have been so successful in the past, is the fact that whether they believe it or not, they have included within their base a space for people of faith, and that has been very successful for them, where they don't even, whether, like I said, whether they're sincere about it or not, and I believe that they're really not sincere about it, but they have seen the strategic benefits of providing a space for those who have religious faith. I think that the left has done the opposite. I think what the left has done is that it hasn't provided a space. It hasn't allowed people of faith to really express that there are different facets of religious expression. And so what happens is that, not everybody expresses their Christian faith in the form of a Jerry Falwell or the religious right or the moral majority or any other kind of right-wing expression. That there are, especially from the Black tradition, and especially from the Black expression of Christianity, there has always been this way of using Christianity, or not just Christianity, but just Black religious faith, as a form of revolutionary expression. So, so that has always not been accepted on the so-called left. And so I think that what happens is that a lot of people, a lot of Black people who are somewhat religious, or who believe in who believe in a God, they've been either put off by this condescension on the left towards people of faith, and then it has also driven some people away from who would probably identify with the politics of the left, and had driven them towards and Jackie could attest to this, about a lot of the Black conservative Christians who would probably normally identify more with the left, but who has found a home with the Christian right.
Yeah, that is like this weird dynamic where, there are a lot of churches, a lot of Black churches where, they're angry about police brutality, but the way their faith has been preached to them by these pastors emphasizes, turning the other cheek and praying for your enemy. And, just a complete misinterpretation of what the scripture actually says about fighting for justice on behalf of the oppressed. That's what the scripture actually tells us to do. And there is an entire progressive expression of the Christian faith that exists in mainline denominations, but there's always been a Black liberation theology expression of the faith from, through that came up through Nat Turner and John Brown, all the way up to Jeremiah Wright. So that's the faith we subscribe to. That's our faith. And
Right. And may I also add, I'm sorry, but may I also add Reverend Graylin Hagler, who's our pastor
right.
now, who follows in that same tradition.
Yeah. So, the expression of faith in protest, the expression of faith in identifying the abuses of the empire, the expression of faith that identifies capitalism as a problem. And this is all actually reflected in the same scriptures that the right uses to claim basically that God is a conservative Republican. If you actually read the scripture and you see the things that Jesus said and did and who he opposed and the institutions those people belong to and represented, you get a very different view of who Jesus and ultimately who God is for and against. And the scriptures are very clear to us that God is on the side of the oppressed. Jesus was on the side of the oppressed. He was among the oppressed. So, but that takes a level of effort in actually reading the scriptures, studying the history, understanding the politics behind why the Bible exists in the form that it does, what was included in the Bible, what wasn't included in the Bible, and that the Bible itself is a political tool that was used by the empire. So there's all of that. Understanding all of that takes you away from that very passive right-wing interpretation of scripture, and I think all faiths, and it turns it into truly a revolutionary kind of expression of harnessing supernatural power to challenge empire and power on behalf of oppressed people.
I think that we need to understand, if I may just add this one last point, I think that what we need to understand is that all religions, especially the major religions of the Abrahamic faiths, when I talk about Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, and we could talk about even some of the Eastern faiths, whether it's Buddhism, Confucianism, Taoism, they've all started off as revolutionary movements. And so when we look, so I think that if a lot of the people on the so-called left, especially those who are responsible for organizing and those who are responsible for leadership positions, who, if you want to really understand the relationship between religion and radical revolutionary movements, then all we have to do is just look at the origins of all of these religions. They all started out as revolutionary movements, where you talk about Muhammad, who was Jesus. All of them were persecuted by the state. Whether you talk about Moses, the father of Judaism, who had to free his people from a mighty empire. So you're talking about, again, state power, state abuses. So they all started off like that. And so I think that it would really behoove the left to really embrace the revolutionary origins of religion, and then so they could see how what we're fighting for and what our ideals are. We have more in common, at least with the progenitors of those faiths, than they do, than we think that the right, or that those who are on the right has.
And then I think for those of us who are people of faith, we have to be really, really careful that we don't go into movement spaces, that we don't go into organizing spaces and try to convert people to the faith. That's not our job. It's really not our job to try to get people to be Christians. It's not our job to try to, quote unquote, save people. Our job is to really reflect the love of our faith tradition in the flesh, and that always expresses itself through standing up for oppressed people. That is our one and only job on the face of this earth. So we do that and stop worrying about people's eternal souls. I think we'll have a better job at being in solidarity with people who we're supposed to be standing in the gap for, really.
I mean, I can appreciate all of those comments, especially the connections that you made, but in particular, this first bit where you were talking about some of the problems that emerge in the church in terms of the ways that the sort of liberation theology of the past has been distorted in really extreme ways. I had a cousin, for example, and my family's from the South. I'm from the South. Everyone still lives in Tennessee and Mississippi. And their churches have grown increasingly more conservative over the years. So I've had cousins, for example, write really absurd things on Facebook, like that Mike Brown deserved to die because he wasn't obeying the authority of the police officer, and really kind of disturbing commentary like that. I would also say that, right now with prosperity gospel really reemerging as a strong, I don't know about reemerging, but definitely emerging as a sort of strong aspect of Christianity in the Deep South, and also throughout Latin America as of late. It's been, I think, more and more difficult in some ways to bridge the gap between the left and religious groups. But at the same time, I think, as I said, some of the connections that you all were just making are really important for us all to remember. And especially considering the fact that, we have even now so many Black Lives Matter activists, for example, who've been explicitly, vocal about the connections between their politics and their religious backgrounds. Oddly, Andrew Sullivan just made a tweet like a little while ago saying that like everyone in BLM is like a Marxist atheist, which is ironic because, as I said, a lot of people have been very frank about their religious backgrounds, including people like Bree Newsom, I know, like prayed when she was taking the Confederate flag down. She's been involved in Black Lives Matter. And there also was Rahel Tasmafarian, I think is her last name, who was very vocal about being, involved in both religious teachings or connecting religious teachings and Black Lives Matter. So those are connections that I hope that more and more people can start to make in order to connect with larger audiences and larger constituencies, if you will. But on that note, I wanted to ask you all about sort of the disconnect that we saw repeatedly during the Sanders campaign, and that I think we continue to see on the left between, arguably between white leftists and Black people, people of color in general, but in particular Black people in the United States and Black Southerners. Do you all have any thoughts and comments on perhaps methods that people on the left in general can take, but especially white leftists, and especially now as we're seeing sort of, this very blatant multiracial movement that's emerging with Black Lives Matter. It's very, very multiracial. And we see in some cases, like in the case of Portland, more white protesters than Black ones. I'm wondering, what are your thoughts on these groups coming together? And what are some of the, like post-mortem commentaries that you think people like a Sanders campaign or people involved could maybe use and consider beyond just the question of connecting with people who are religious going forward to forge stronger connections and ultimately earn more votes?
Yeah, I think I feel like we did this after the first campaign. We did this after 2016 with the Sanders campaign, we meaning, Black leftists. And I was much more involved in the Sanders and supporting Sanders then than I was this time around. Because I saw that that a lot of white progressives really did not want to listen to Black progressives and leftists on how to reach out to Black people to get them to vote for their candidate. There was no way that Bernie Sanders should have ever lost the Deep South if his campaign had actually gone into these spaces where you've got a lot of older, sick Black people who are on Medicare, who are on Medicaid, who, are unhappy with their insufficient health insurance, who still are struggling with student debt, who have, rent that they cannot pay and the rent keeps going up. and Bernie Sanders' ideas were great, but they didn't reach the people who needed to push him across the line in 2016. He was told that. His campaign was told that by his Black staff members. Several people who we personally knew were working on his campaign, and his campaign didn't listen. One of those things that should have been done was outreach to Black churches. But this time around, we were hoping, maybe he does things different. Maybe the white leftists will finally listen to us Black leftists and realize that you cannot ignore an entire group of Black people just because you don't like their faith expression, or you feel like the Democratic Party bosses in the South have their vote on a lock, or the generational divide is so deep and entrenched that you might as well not even try. And then when the campaign didn't do the work that it needed to do to address those issues, to not even make inroads in those areas, then when the South went for Joe Biden in the last primary, at the word of Jim Clyburn, because according to him, Sanders didn't ask for his endorsement. I mean, dude, you couldn't even pick up the phone and say, listen, Jim, I understand that you've got a long history with Biden, but your constituents need these policies. I mean, you couldn't even try.
And they've worked on legislation together too, if I'm not mistaken, right? Like, haven't they put stuff together on the floor?
Yeah, and I mean, it's not to say that I absolutely believe everything Jim Clyburn says, because I don't. But just the idea that for whatever reason you didn't even feel it necessary to pick up the phone and ask, look, can you take a chance on doing something different this time to see if we can get something better for your people, your constituents this time? That's like, and then when the South goes to Biden, on the word of Jim Clyburn, then the same white progressives who would not push the Sanders campaign to do these things that Black leftists told them to do, then the very same white progressives turn around and blame Black voters for not voting for Sanders. And it's like, that to me sounds like an abusive relationship, and we're tired of seeing it. We're tired of experiencing it. Yeah, we're tired of having our vote taken advantage of and taken for granted by the Democratic establishment. But we're tired of this kind of leftist, this left kind of, I don't even know what to call it other than like this manipulation by left white progressives, where we're not going to do anything to really address the needs that Black people say that they have. We don't really care what your needs are. We're just going to shove all of these general economic policies at you, and they're going to be better for you, and you're just going to take it. And then when people feel like, well, that's not what I want, you didn't even bother to have a conversation with me, and you don't treat me any differently from any other white people, so I'll just go with the white people I know. Then it's like, well, see, this is why you people don't get anything. This is why you people don't ever have nice things. And it's like, okay.
I agree with all of the points that Jackie made. I think that what there has to be is mutual respect. There has to be respect from the white left to accept Black leadership. That's number one. You don't see a lot of that. You don't see a lot of these organizations, especially on the white left, remain majority white when it comes to their leadership, when it comes to their committees. There has to be a respect for the abilities of Black people also. This is not a thing where Black people are sitting back waiting to be saved by well-intentioned white people. This is a thing where this has to be a partnership, and that partnership has to be based upon respect. The Bernie Sanders campaign did great when they went out there to, I believe it was Arizona, and they were able to organize the Latina X community out there. They've done great. In fact, it shocked not only the Democratic establishment, Democratic Party establishment, but it shocked even those on the right that Bernie Sanders' campaign was able to galvanize the Latinx voters out there. And they've done that through respecting the grassroots Latinx organizations that were out there, something that they didn't do when it came to the African American organizations and grassroots street organizations, which they didn't spend they didn't spend hardly the amount of money among Black people that they did out there in with the Latinx. So what happens is that white liberals have to really be honest about their own underlying biases when it comes to dealing with Black people. We have a very long history in this country of a cultural war in this country, as we know, which is rooted in slavery, which is rooted in Jim Crow, which is rooted in the way that we got together in this country in the first place. And so what happens is the fact that as much as the white left and want to work with us and have the great intentions of doing this and sincere intentions, don't get me wrong, because one of the questions that you asked earlier was about how about what we see about the diversity of the protests today. I think that it's the greatest thing that I've seen, at least in my lifetime, and I have a lot of hope in it. What I fear is still this white liberal paternalism when it comes to us, and that is something that I think that the white left has to deal with. Bernie Sanders, and I give you a great example. The whole issue around reparations. White liberals have to stop being afraid to back a Black economic agenda, because it's going to turn off some white people. It has to be some courage there. Bernie Sanders should have shown some courage. This whole thing around reparations about, well, what does it look like? And this game that's being played when we know that the wealth gap in this country amongst Black people and white people is widening every time. The fact that it even started off being this type of gap because our ancestors worked for 200 some years without pay, and then we were disenfranchised from the economic possibilities of this country for 300 more years. So all of these things, played a part in the reason why you find Black people mostly poor, mostly unable to have social mobility in this society. A lot of that is just based upon the fact that we have been made broke, as a friend of mine said on Facebook, that Black people have been made broke by this government. And so it would take this government in order to undo the damage that is done. But white liberals have to not only internalize that message, but they have to stand on it and be courageous about it and not worry about it getting white people down south or those or other people mad because this is what it's going to take in order to have a more perfect union. So I think so just to sum up what I'm saying, there has to be an acceptance of Black leadership. There has to be an acceptance of a Black agenda, specific agenda. This thing of bringing putting everybody's agenda together and say, well, we have a whole left agenda. Well, that's not going to work, because the reason why it's not going to work, because we all have different needs. The fact that remains is that white liberals has been telling Black people for the longest time, we're going to get to you, but let's deal with this first. And let's deal with that. And then so what happens is we have a Barack Obama who comes in and has 2 terms, and then we come out as a community worse off than we did before he became president, because once again we were being told not to push the first Black president into backing a Black agenda, and that we don't want to rock the boat if it's seen that Barack Obama or the Democratic Party is doing too much for Black people. So that has to end, because what's going to happen is that we're going to find ourselves again being worse off than we were in. It's just going to get worse and worse.
Right. And it also seems like this problem continues to repeat itself, right? Like, it's not like this is everyone's first rodeo. We've seen these sort of disconnects before in the past. And also, we've definitely seen a lot of sort of white leftist procrastination or placing on the back burner of Black issues or Black specific issues in this country. I'm wondering, though, like, and just sort of reflecting on a lot of what you both said, which I think were excellent points in terms of how to sort of reshape the left in terms of making it more a space that cares about, listens to, and prioritizes Black issues. I'm also wondering, though, like, how do we get to that point where we're making people do those things? Like, I guess that's where I have a big question mark, right? Like, how do you make it so that white leftists then begin to listen or diversify their movements or respect us or understand and value our contributions, see us as adequate and sufficient or even, vital leaders in our own communities, trust our judgment, et cetera? How do we, as we ourselves are not white, how do we then make our brothers and sisters who are in these movements begin to fully implement some of the things that you all both suggested that would make the left a much stronger political space, and one that can actually gain power in this country and do what's right by its people?
The interesting thing about that question, and I love that question because it reminds me of something that Malcolm X said at a speech he did, I think at Harvard University, when a white student asked him, "What can I do to help Black people in the struggle?" And Malcolm very curtly said nothing to her. And then later on in life, he regretted being so dismissive of her, because he grew to realize that there could be plenty of room for white people to join in the struggle and struggle along with us. But he also understood that that was not something that we could make white people do. We couldn't make them see, we couldn't make them understand it. They either wanted to do it or not. But what we had to do was to always organize ourselves. And we always have to do this work in our communities, whether our white progressive or white leftist friends and alleged comrades, because really, if they're not organizing with us, then I question their allyship and comradeship. But we have to do this organizing in our communities, whether they are involved or not. And I think that what's happening now is we're at the point where leftists are realizing that this has been their mistake. This is why places like Portland are seeing the kind of protest activity that it is seeing, because they realize, I think because a lot of white people who consider themselves leftists are realizing we have made the mistake of ignoring what Black people have been saying and leaving them out of not just the conversation about what justice is and how it gets done, but we've wanted to lead all the time, and we've not let the people who are the most impacted and oppressed by these systems and powers, we've not let them lead. So now we're the ones who are going to have to be out here taking the brunt of whatever it is this system has to throw at people to protect Black folks, while I don't want to say that, not to protect Black folks, but doing our part in this struggle, because we should have been out here with people all along. And I think that's just kind of a natural kind of progression that is going to have to happen as this system defends itself from the dismantling that is happening. And I think that it only comes through this kind of natural progression of struggle, because we've personally experienced what happens when we try to be proactive in trying to get white progressives and leftists to understand that we can't just have a conversation about class and that fixes everything. We have to have a conversation about class and race. The two are inextricable, and leaving the conversation about race out is ignoring our particular struggle, the struggle of Latinx people, the struggle of Indigenous people. and bringing up indigenous people, we've seen white leftists be more willing to talk about Native American struggle than Black folk struggle. They've been more willing to talk about Latinx people struggle than Black folk struggle. So there's that aspect of it too that's really, really messy. But we've also seen white leftists be angry when Black people say, well, fine, we need our own organizing spaces because we don't trust a whole lot of white people, because we've seen what they do to us. We've seen the way they lie. We've seen the way they come in and try to take over. So let us have this space for ourselves. And we've seen them use that against us too. So basically, I don't personally believe that there is anything that we can do to make white leftists do this work alongside us. I think the system does that. Our job is to continue organizing our people and struggling for the things that we need, and everyone will eventually realize, oh my God, we've all got to have this multiracial class solidarity that Black folks have been talking about for decades. How do we get that? Then I think we have to be receptive to folks realizing that we were right all along, and then we can do that work. But I don't think we can make white leftists or white progressives want to do that work with us a second sooner than that.
I think Jackie hit the nail on the head on a whole lot of occasions. Not really much to add to it. I would say that I was encouraged by the most recent protests down when Jackie and I went down to Lafayette Park, and we got caught up in the whole protest down there where we both got assaulted by the police. I saw white people falling in line behind Black leadership, and I was encouraged by that. And I think that this is where the change is coming from. The change isn't coming from Jackie and I's generation. It's going to come from those young people that's down there now. They are the ones, the hip hop generation, the ones that grew up listening to Black hip hop, and the ones that have embraced Black culture, not just superficially, but embrace Black culture where it's almost like their own. That's the change that I see that's coming. And I see to the point that where these young people don't see Black leadership as being something different or alien. And it's like, and so I was really encouraged by that. But other than that, though, what everything Jackie said, I think was spot on.
And this protest was one of the more recent Black Lives Matter protests, like that started taking off after the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, because I know you had mentioned at one point, or both of you, I believe, that you were helping with kits, right, for activists. At one point, you said that you weren't able to go because of the, I don't know, coronavirus fears or something like that. But so you did end up going to a live protest in person?
Yeah, you know, one thing about the Luqmans, I mean, like, we just can't stay away from a good fight. You know what I mean? It's still in us. We just can't. We have some footage, and that when we went down there, and like I said, we both got assaulted by the police, and but I mean, we were really, and I guess I can speak for Jackie on this. We were really inspired by seeing those young folks put themselves on the line like that. Now we know enough, being that we're middle-aged people. We understand our limitations now. So, so I mean, so we knew what we could do and what we couldn't do. But at the same time, I mean, this is where I think the strength of our movement comes from, to the fact that, yeah, the young people have the energy, they have the physicality and all those things in order to do those type of things. But those in our generation and older, we graduated from foot soldiers to hopefully being the elders who can give guidance to the foot soldiers. So
yeah, the strategists.
Right. So that's the role that Jackie and I are very comfortable in playing if we're allowed to play that. So and I have to say allowed because this is a people's movement. It depends on what the people want.
Right. And I think that's like the key. I have seen organizations and people who recognize the need to educate their people, just like we in our communities have to continually engage in political education for our communities. White leftists, this new generation of leftists, of white leftists and white progressives, are understanding that as well. So they also recognize that it's not our job to, it's not Black leftists' job to make white people get it. It's their job. So that, I think, is the thing that I'm really encouraged to see, and I'm grateful that I'm able to be exposed to people who are doing that, like through my work with, on By Any Means Necessary and the Real News Network, because I get to kind of meet these people and talk to them and hear that, there are some people who are doing this background, on the ground work, going out into these white communities that are targets for the, this right wing political messaging, and trying to circumvent that messaging and explaining, these issues of race and class and how they affect them. And they are making some inroads. So that's the thing that's encouraging to me, especially when we recognize that the moment we are in now, this is not, we don't want people to think that anything that is happening in the streets right now is going to result in immediate change. Capitalism isn't going to be dismantled by like next month, right? This is
if only.
I mean, it would be great if that were true, but if it were that easy, we would have done it already, because we've always been in this struggle. It's great that everyone else who is involved in this struggle is involved in this struggle right now. But I think we need people to understand that this is a protracted struggle. This is a marathon, not a sprint. And this isn't even the end of the first leg. I don't even think we're even close to handing off the baton yet. So don't get tired.
So you had mentioned the Real News and By Any Means Necessary, and I wanted to talk to you all about that and about Luqman Nation. But before I transitioned a bit, I wanted to just ask you, what is it like to be activists and to do engage in any sort of political action in DC? Because you all live in DC, which is, the belly of the beast, the center of like American imperialism. It's what we would formally call the metropole, right? If we're talking about old school colonialism. So I'm wondering, what are your thoughts, just sort of reflecting on living in the center of such massive world power, capitalism, racism, imperialism, all the isms, and still engaging as activists? Does it feel more tense for you all, or oppressive in some way? And is there sort of this, I don't know, like spatial suffocation, if you will, of being surrounded by the CIA, the White House, and all of these spaces that technically symbolize what you all are fighting against?
I don't know. I'm gonna let Abdus answer that first, because see, he's not from here, so I'm interested to hear how he feels about it.
Well, I'm not impressed at all. That's the thing. I wasn't impressed before I moved down here, and I'm not impressed from living here almost 10 years. That being said, I think that one of the limitations that I feel as an activist is not being able to engage the system in the way that I'm used to engaging the system when I lived in New Jersey, which is my home state, because DC doesn't have representation. And so what happens is that, the people, we're basically disenfranchised from engaging in the political process, just based upon the fact that DC is not a state. And so, and seeing the politics being played even around that issue, the politics are being played around that issue, where the fact that now that DC is becoming more and more white, now the issue of statehood is taken more seriously. But when Black people all that time, when it was known as Chocolate City, when Black people all that time was talking about statehood and stuff, it wasn't an issue that was given any seriousness, because because of all of what that would have represented and what that represented to the powers that be. This is the most policed city that I have ever lived in, and I believe it's the most police city. I told Jackie one time, we were just driving around, and I told Jackie, I said, my God, I said, how many police departments they have here? I said, like every institution in this city has their own police force. So that's pretty scary. But I think that it also presents a challenge too, because you do have a large disenfranchised population within Washington, D.C., which is becoming more and more disenfranchised due to gentrification. And now that we're seeing the dire consequences of the corona pandemic, especially upon the communities of Black and brown communities in this city, and the fact that the economic situation in the city, with respect to Black and brown people, is getting worse and worse. So that presents opportunities, unique opportunities. I think that's not even experienced in other parts of the country. It provides unique opportunities for those of us who are on the ground here, to fight even harder, and to basically use the underground journalism, the overt journalism that exists, in order to highlight the disparities which is happening, as you say, within this capital of this city, which represents capitalism, imperialism, empire, which represents all of that projects to the world the message of freedom and democracy, yet doesn't have it within its own sphere of influence. It's really sphere of influence. So it presents us, and it also puts us in the crosshairs, I believe, because where you do have all of the police and surveillance apparatuses here. I already told Jackie, I said, I love to see what's in our dossier. I would love to see it, because I know we have one. You know what I mean? I know we have one. So I said, I would love to see that. But this is what we believe, getting back to how we started this program, getting back to our faith tradition. Jackie and I, being people of faith, this gives us the strength and courage to face, and I understand that a lot of people might not understand where we're coming from, but it also gives us the strength to understand that that we believe that we're put here from a higher authority, and that higher authority is the one that really calls all the shots. So whatever happens, happens. But we can't, we have to honor those people that went before us, who went through the same thing, and who have lost their lives doing this, and whose families have been severely impacted by doing this type of work, but they weren't deterred. They understood that, as we stood the old program that Jackie and I grew up on called Eyes on the Prize. They knew that they had to keep their eyes on the prize, and so that's what we're trying to do. We understand that, yeah, we can all just live for ourselves, but we won't have a better world if everybody done that. So that's at least how I see it.
Yeah, it is weird. I mean, how I grew up in this city since I was 6 years old. And I don't know that it feels any more oppressive here than growing up like in my hometown of Jarrett, Virginia, where I was aware of, white racism in a small southern town, since I was a little kid, and understanding that there were certain things I could and could not do, and certain places I could and could not go, because, the racist white people made it that way, and we weren't safe if we defied that. But I think I did not understand the issue that Abdus brought up, the occupation-like presence of not just Metro Police over here in the area of the city where we live, but also just the endless number of police departments. The housing police, the Metro Police, the CIA police, the Supreme Court police. There's the Park Police. There's and they all have jurisdiction. All of these alphabet soup police agencies all have the authority to snatch you up and take you away somewhere. And they all cooperate with each other. And I had no idea that existed in this city until I became like really seriously politically active. And that does, I think, impact the level of awareness that we have because we're so active in, politically. So we're, more aware of our surroundings and stuff when we move around. But I mean, that's like this heavy thing. Like we have a big, I mean big red, black, and green flag out front and a Black Lives Matter flag. And we also live on a block where there are cops who live in. So, we get the stares, and it's something I never thought about before, but that's like that's like it. That's like the encapsulation of our life in this city, in this system, and as activists. It's like it's going to be uncomfortable sometimes because the entire system and the agents of the system are all around us, but we have to do what we do and be who we are, and that's never going to change.
Right, and you all seem to do that proudly. I mean, you're hyper visible. You're active on social media. You have your own show. Jacqueline, as I said, you're on The Real News and By Any Means Necessary. What I'm interested in is sort of how you all are navigating the journalist space, and especially alternative journalism, because I feel like, oftentimes I see something where people will say, like, where are all the Black lefties in all media? And I'm like, right here, like there are a lot of us, and you all are some of the first ones who come to mind. And so I'm curious about your experiences. How did you come about founding the Luqman Nation show on YouTube? And then Jackie specifically, how did you end up working with Real News and By Any Means Necessary? And on top of that, considering, as I said, that you all are so hyper visible as activists and as journalists, how then have you what are the precautions, I guess, that you would tell others to take if they're interested in something like that? And then also, what have been your experiences in the crosshairs, especially recently? Although certainly, I mean, if you started doing activism and whatnot in the 80s and 90s, you have to deal with the Cold War leftover stuff. But we see now a reemergence of this sort of rhetoric with Russiagate and a sort of foreclosure of leftist activism, but specifically Black leftist activism and visibility in the press. So I'm curious to know about your experiences, how you got into this. And yeah, if you could just sort of talk about the history for you all, and as I said, how you're navigating this space with all of these different adversaries coming at people like you.
Oh, you better tell that story about how you started this, Abdus.
Well, when Jackie and I first met, we started when we, through the whole dating thing, and we started to, really connect a lot of the things that we had in common. And outside of powerlifting, yes, we both were powerlifters. So it's like,
yes.
Yeah. So we had that in common. And, but we used to, I lived in New Jersey at the time. She was down here. So, of course, we did the whole thing of talking on the phone every night. And I noticed that every time, we would always talk politics. And for me as a man, it was really difficult because I never ran into a woman that I dated or was interested in who loved to talk about politics, and I was like, wow, this is really a plus here. So when we did finally get married and I relocated down here, that continued. I mean, we would get into these long debates about politics and everything, not agreeing on everything. We didn't agree on everything, but the fact that it was stimulating, and so one day I just told her, I said, you know what? And it was because I love how articulate she is. So I was like, wow, because I grew up listening to talk radio. I was a nerd in Camden, New Jersey that used to love to listen to talk radio, as a teenager. So so the acoustics, I was very fine-tuned with, so when I would listen to her talk, I used to always say in my mind, wow, she would make a really good talk show host. And so one day I just brought that up to her, and I was like, wow, and it wasn't for me to even be included. It was just for her. And so I said, wow, I said, you would really be good at this. And oh no, I wouldn't be. Nah. And I had to basically just say, well, hey, look, let's start this. And it was during the time of the Freddie Gray thing, and we had started to really become involved in certain grassroots organizations. So I said, well, let's start this blog talk, because a lot of people were starting to get on Blog Talk Radio at the time. And I said, well, let us, just see where it goes. So we started a blog talk thing. We was doing a show like maybe I think it was every once a week, and at the same time, we were still being involved in this grassroots organization. When the Freddie Gray thing kicked off, this is where I seen how Mrs. Luqman really had what it took, in my view, to really do this thing. We went to Baltimore. Baltimore was still on fire. I think they didn't even. I think the cops were just being indicted, and I mean the city was still on fire. And we went up there with this organization, and Jackie, I just sat back and I just watched how she was interviewing these kids, and not only the way she was interviewing them, but there was no fear. And we were surrounded by cops. We were surrounded. I mean, like I said, it was on fire, and there was no fear. There was really this sincere attitude on her part of getting involved. I mean, she was like a war correspondent. And so, and I noticed that how the people took to her. These kids came up and they were in a line, Wendy, let me tell you, they were in a line to talk to her. We still have some old audio clips of those times. And I even every now and then, Wendy, I have to tell you, I listen to those audio clips and I think it's still some of the best work we ever done. We recently started putting those clips back up on our Patreon page. And that was our baptism. We were baptized during the Freddie Gray situation. And it just started to grow from there. And like every other platform, we didn't know what we had. There was nobody listening to us, not even our own family members. Nobody was paying attention to us. But, and a couple of times we wanted to give up. But it was just something in me, because I am a competitor, and it was just something in me that just said, no, we're going to continue to do this. We're going to continue to do it. We left Blog Talk and we started, utilizing other social media platforms. But and then the audience started to build, and one of the things that when we started Luqman Nation, our main priority was that we felt that there was a void when it came to the way that information was disseminated to our folk. And when I mean our folk, I'm talking about the poor Black folks in the projects where we live at. And so we wanted to fill that void as best as we could, as far as not only disseminating the information internationally and locally to our people, but we also wanted to be the conduit to tell what the stories of our folk who we live around, the folk in the projects, the folks up there that's on the street corners and everywhere, all of the spaces that we find our people. We wanted to be that vehicle to let those in power know how we feel. And I say we because we're not separated from them, how we feel. And that's what we existed. We always tried to, and I told Jackie, I said, this is what we exist for. We've always tried to remain true to that mission. We didn't chase all the, we seen that a lot of our contemporaries during that time were chasing all the hot stuff, people that we respected and we still respect, who had bigger platforms than ours, more followers and all this other kind of stuff. They were just chasing the latest thing, and was basing their program around the latest subject at the time. But Jackie and I, we just stayed true to what our mission was. And no, we didn't have the biggest following. We didn't have the largest platform. When we would go live, we didn't have the largest audience, but we just kept to what we knew and what we got into this. We're not in it to chase fame. We're not in it. We definitely ain't in it for the money. And we're not in it for anything that would elevate our own personal selves. We're in it because we have a love for Black people, and we have a love specifically for poor Black people, who are the least loved in the world, in my opinion. And so this is why what we do and how we navigate that, I say quickly, is that Jackie and I have learned over the course of time of doing this, that we had to compartmentalize our life, our daily lives. So we get up every morning doing our devotions, giving honor to God and our Creator, to get us started on the day. We do that every morning. And we also understand that there's times when we have to have downtime. There's times when, no, we don't answer the phone. There's times where we don't answer the instant messages on Facebook. There's times when we just, like we did yesterday, order Chinese food and watch a movie, because we have to decompress from this stuff. And and there's times now where, so not so much me, but Jackie being in the spaces that she's in, there's times when Jackie has to say no to things. No, I can't do this. No, I can't do this interview. No, I can't do that. And so we're learning that part of doing this fight. And when you said about advice, well, one of my main advice to those who's in this line of work is that you have to not forget about yourself, because if we're not well, if we're not taking care of ourselves, then we're no good to anybody else. So that takes I mean, Jackie and I meditate. I mean, we have spaces where we meditate. So we learn to incorporate things in our lives to help us emotionally, physically, all the other, just our total being, in order to and let's say this too, not giving too much away, but we're also we also tie our camel too, which is an old Semitic proverb that says, trust in God but tie your camel, which means that we also we're a Second Amendment couple. We do believe that sometimes you have to speak the language of the street, literally. We're peace and love when peace and love comes to us. But so we try to embody every phase of our revolutionary lifestyle. And that's so, again, one of my advice is that you have to be able to navigate these spaces. You have to pick and choose your battles, and that's what we've been learned. That's what we have learned to do during the course of this journey.
Yeah, I mean, and that has been like when he gave me, the idea to do this, it was just like, first of all, I'm not good at this. And I had to come out of, this really deep indoctrination of the Christian church. I had some of those same weird ideologies about, respectability, politics, and all this kind of foolishness. So I had to, and I was already challenging those ideas, but it's very hard to challenge those ideas when you're by yourself in the middle of it. Right. And I always say this, and it's very true. He gave me the courage that I needed to do that more. So in a lot of ways, this was, me marrying him, us getting married was like, we wouldn't be here if we had never gotten married, if we hadn't met and hadn't gotten married. And if I hadn't just kind of trusted that whatever it was that he wanted us to do with this show thing, that's what I called it at first, the show thing, that, I mean, it would be okay, I guess. And I didn't know what I was doing. I had no experience in it. I was terrified. But I like talking to people. I like finding out about what people are going through. I like listening to and telling people's stories. I've always liked doing that. So that came easy to me. And the parts of this that were really, really difficult, and they're still sometimes very difficult for me, is dealing with the politics of the movement, like dealing with people who are, people that you put your trust in, who you align yourself with, who you find out aren't really in it for anything other than advancing their own personal benefit. Handling the disappointment of that kind of thing. Having people turn their backs on you, or do sneaky things. You know, you have to deal with that and realize that not everybody who is in this, who has a platform, who has a whole bunch of followers, are really about that life. There are too many people in this, especially the online movement, who are in it for their personal benefit. And that's okay. It's just that that's really hard to navigate for me, because then you have to find a way to distance yourself from these people. You have to, there's this whole almost cleansing process that I feel like I have to do to protect our integrity. Because the one thing that we said that we would always do, regardless of what this turned into, was that we would never, ever be or project anything other than who we were and what we believe in as individuals, as people, regardless of what happens, whether we become, you know, whether we get big platforms or whether we remain, you know, these, you know, two obscure Black folk that nobody knows over here, you know, in DC. Regardless of what happens, the Luqmans will always be who we are. We will always talk about what's important to us. We'll always tell the truth as we see it. And we'll never let anybody tell us what they want us to say about the condition of our people. And we've stuck to that, and sticking to that has ended up landing me in spaces where I can represent Luqman Nation on the Real News Network. I can represent Luqman Nation on Sputnik Radio. And I don't have to change what I believe. Nobody tells me what to do. Of course, you know, because we're on Sputnik, I always get, you know, every once in a while, oh my God, you're paid by the Russians. You know, so, you know, you're a Russian agent. Well, that ain't the first time we've heard that, you know, from folks, you know, just trying to dismiss our activism. And certainly that's not the first time that white people have used that to silence Black people who have been in this struggle before us. That's a common trope that's been used. I mean, W.E.B. Du Bois, Paul Robeson, Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, that all, Marcus Garvey, that everybody, that they were all accused of being Russian agents. We've been struggling against racism in this country because we're communists, according to some people, not because, you know, we're oppressed and we're sick of it. So these are things that we still have to face. And for me, because I guess I'm really, I don't like confrontation with people. I had to learn how to handle those kinds of interactions. Abdus is great at it because he's from New Jersey.
No shade to New Jersey, of course, but
you know, I'm not so much because I was a nice church girl from, you know, Jerry, Virginia. But you learn, you develop your chops in this business, and I think we've been really fortunate to have been, for us being true to ourselves, to have landed us in the position that we're in now. I mean, this isn't, like I said, you know, like Abdus said, we don't have the biggest platforms of other people, and we're not as well known as other folks, but we don't really care because this is not about, for us, any of those things. This is about the struggle. This is about liberation for our people. We see this as us playing our part to do that. And you know, however long we have this spot, this role to play, we're going to do the work.
Yeah, and I just wanted to just add too, Wendy, and that's why we appreciate, you know, platforms like yours, because you know, we don't have the biggest platform, and we understand that, but we do appreciate when people such as yourself, you know, because we're still in this "we don't believe we're here" type stage. We're still into that, and so we're very appreciative when folks such as yourself allow us to expand our voice a little bit, you know. So just wanted to just let you know that.
Oh,
I mean, the
yeah.
feeling is mutual, obviously. Like, I really respect the work that you all do. And I think that it's something that's necessary, especially because, like, as I said, sometimes you turn on YouTube or, you kind of look at Twitter or Facebook or whatever, and it just feels like there's a void. And so I appreciate that you all actively fill that void of engaging in so many different topics, while at the same time being well centered on the left, in a way that's very salient, to be honest, and it's very clear. I think there's sometimes, one of the issues that I've run into with other podcasters and listening to other podcasts, I should say, is that I'll be on board. I'm like, yeah, that's good. That's really interesting. And then things will just go in a really awful direction. Like they become racist or
Yep.
sexist or whatever. And
Mhm.
you're like, what the hell? Like, why can't people just stay centered on and focused, to be honest, on liberation for everyone and not
That's
just,
right.
one small group of people on the left as opposed to everyone. One aspect of that, though, that I thought was interesting that you all brought up on a show a few days ago or maybe a week ago, you all often talk about Africa. And I don't mean Africa as a country, but I'm saying Africa as a continent, and it's in recognizing all of its diversity and diverse politics. You all are very engaged in that as a subject, and it's something that again is often absent on the left. It's almost as if some leftists in the United States and even Europe and elsewhere forget that Africa exists, and has its own specific, country specific issues. But I'm wondering, what are your thoughts on repatriation? Because it's, as I said, it's something that you all mentioned, I believe, on the last episode or a few episodes ago. You talked about perhaps the prospect of going back to Africa, or the need or interest in going back to Africa for African Americans. And I wanted to know a little bit more about that, if you could expound upon that sentiment, especially because you all mentioned throughout our discussion now the kind of need to be self-sufficient at times, especially when the movements themselves sort of fall apart. You always have to have your own community and your own base and your own sort of home, if you will, political home to go to. And I'm wondering, what are your thoughts on Africa and specific countries, if applicable here, within Africa, that you feel like could somehow represent some aspect of that, repatriation, even if just political? So not saying that you all are going to go move to Ghana or something. But but maybe, I mean, yeah, like maybe one day. But in what ways, sort of what position for you all does Africa, the continent, and then if applicable, specific countries, if you want to talk about that, what does that represent for you all, and what's its significance for Black leftists in particular, but perhaps the left as a whole?
One of the things that Jackie and I try to stress to people when we're able to do it is that we're Pan-Africanists, and Pan-Africanists in the traditional sense. Now that has been demonized lately, especially by groups like the ADOS movement and others. But I feel like being a student, or I should say being one who has studied Garveyism, which I consider myself a Garveyite, believe that that this repatriation and with is a very good thing. I think the fact that the continent is starting to align itself with the diaspora, which it hasn't always done because of its own problems, being under the yoke of colonialism, and the fact that a lot of these African nations are only independence was only like 50 years ago. So you're talking about very young nations with respect to independence, and so. But in that time, you're starting to see the African nations, for the most part, starting to recognize the global struggle of the diaspora, starting to understand the role that the continent is playing, and has always played, and will continue to play in this world. And Jackie and I, the show that you were talking about, Wendy, Jackie and I were trying to stress about the role of Africa, its role in a post-COVID world, and we already see the dynamics being played out there. But Africa has always been, as Dr. John Henry Clarke once said, has always been a place where everybody wants something, but nobody wants to pay for it. And I think that the continent has been reaching out to the diaspora, especially to those of us in America, for the longest time, in order for us to use our talents and skill to help develop the continent. And we're starting to see those play out. And I think that's one of the reasons why you see this fear, because let's look at it. White supremacy has always, and they've been successful at it, but they have always wanted to disconnect us from our African family. That was one of the major victories in their dominance over us, is to disconnect us from our African family, to call us Negro, to call us everything but what we are, African. And so that was by design. That was by design. It was to disconnect us from not only our brothers and sisters on the continent, but from the resources which is under their feet. You know, so yeah, I think that it's very encouraging that African nations are starting to align with the diaspora politically and understand the struggles that we're having, which is their struggles too. It would only strengthen us as a global African community when Africa is strong. I believe, Jackie, if you can help me, but I believe it was Kwame Ture, who the late Kwame Ture, who said that when Africa is strong, you will see Africans everywhere become stronger, because what would defend our rights and what would defend our protections is having strong nation states. As we've seen with white people in this country, the history of white people who have been abused in this country, assaulted and murdered, that when they were connected to nation states, then those nation states were able to intervene on their behalf. We've seen that recently with the Australian woman that was murdered by a cop up in Minneapolis a couple of years ago. So we understand that when Africa gets stronger, then that would strengthen all of our positions as African people. And we're starting to even see the seeds of that starting to happen right now. So I think that it is our home. And I think that it's our birthright. And of course, we understand that everybody's not going to move to Africa, but it's good to know that it's there. It's good to know that African nations are giving us citizenship. It's good to know that we have the opportunity to return home if we would like, even if we don't do it physically, but even spiritually, even mentally, to return home as the descendants of kidnapped people, and go back home to the land where they gave birth to us. So yeah, I'm very encouraged. Jackie and I, we talk about it all the time about, we would like to retire there. I personally, when the time comes for me, I would like to be buried in Africa, somehow, some way to return home and end this 400, 500 year nightmare for at least my family, and to return back home. So this is something. I hope I answered your question, but it has so many different aspects to it. It has so many different meanings to this that it's kind of hard to cover it all, in the segment. But yeah, we're definitely our Pan-Africanist ideology is, which is also our political ideology, is the reason why we talk about Africa so much.
Yeah, I mean, just the fact that as socialists, we first got our taste of socialism as an alternative, and not just an alternative really, but the goal of a society for African people throughout the diaspora, because of African leaders who fought for independence for their countries from European colonization, and were trying to move their countries toward socialism. We're talking about, people like Julius Nyerere and Modibo Keita and Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana, and Sekou Toure and Patrice Lumumba. And interestingly, all of these African leaders, there were like 7 of them, who all achieved independence of their various African nations at around the same time. They were involved in a Pan-African Union to advance socialism and to create a Pan-African Union independent of colonization. And US and Western powers had a hand in assassinating every single one of them. So we are socialists not because we read Karl Marx first And that's, and that's not any, shade thrown toward Karl Marx, but we're socialists because we knew the history of the struggle against colonialism on the continent of Africa. So, I mean, for us, politically, ideologically, Africa is that important to us. And it's, through our in-person activism that we became familiarized with, the works of Marx and Lenin, because, these folks got their idea of socialism from someone, and it was Marx and Lenin. And so we kind of got it on the back end, but, Pan-Africanism was the gateway to that ideology for us. And we also realized that as the geopolitical balance of power changes in the world, because that is absolutely happening right now. It was happening anyway before coronavirus, but coronavirus is, we think, speeding up that transition. The United States is no longer at the pinnacle of global geopolitical power in the world anymore. And it's, of course, fighting tooth and nail to maintain that position. But as Abdus always says, nature abhors a vacuum. So when the United States recedes from that pinnacle of geopolitical power, there's going to be a vacuum. What's going to fill that vacuum? And this is what other countries around the world are working in alignment to do. And what they're doing, countries like Russia, countries like China, and other non-aligned countries, non-aligned meaning countries that are not aligned with the Western imperialist powers of the United States and Europe, they are making deals to work together, but they're also making deals with Africa, with countries in Africa. Now, these deals that they are making with countries on the continent are not always mutually beneficial. We're not naive in thinking that there is no level of exploitation that is ever going to happen in these new power dynamics. The difference with these relationships, as opposed to the colonialism and the neo-colonialism that shaped really modern Africa, is that these other countries are willing to make some kind of investments in the continent. They're building infrastructure. They are making monetary investments. That stuff comes with strings, and there's always political chicanery that we have to be very, very aware of. But Africa is emerging as the centerpiece to whatever the global, the new global power dynamic will be after the United States leaves a void in being at the top of the geopolitical world order. Every other country in the world knows that. So does the United States. And we as African people understand this, and we feel like it is incumbent upon us to make discussions about Africa, the importance of Africa, not just in the history of our people and the fact that Africa is where we came from. We don't have last names like Malone and Jefferson. Those are my family last names. And Johnson, that was Abdus's family last name before he changed his name. There's nobody in Africa named after those people. There are no Johnsons and Malones and, Butts and Cribs in Africa. Our last names were given to us by the people who owned our ancestors, and our ancestors came here from the continent. There is no divorcing our existence anywhere on this planet from the origin of all of us, and that is Africa. I don't care how anybody feels about that. That's just true. So we believe that Africa is important, not just in relation to the history of us as a people, wherever we are in the world, but also Africa is important to our future, not just, politically, but also as our future home, even as we fight for equality and justice here, because we did build this and we built wherever it was, we were enslaved in this world. We should be fighting for justice wherever we are in the world, but Africa is our home. So the discussion about Africa in left politics, you're right, is non-existent, and we hate it. And we are doing what we can to change that, because Africa is going to be much more important to whatever this world is going to look like than a whole lot of people realize. And I think it's going to be more important than a whole lot of people are comfortable with.
Yeah, definitely. And I appreciate that you all, I think, at least from my understanding of some of the things that you all have said, not only during this interview, but during your shows, is that you're conscious of the degree to which there are sometimes these uneven aspects of repatriation as well, right? If you look at situations like what happened in Liberia over time, if you look at even sometimes some of the newer expat movements where you have Americans or Europeans of African descent moving to parts of Africa, but then sometimes engaging in practices that are also exploitative, right? That just sort of rehash older forms of power, but with newer faces. But I recognize through a lot of your dialogues on the show and things like that, that you all are very conscious of this issue. And I think have the right type of mentality and politics, going into seeing this sort of move, if you ever were to take it, to be something that would be collaborative with the people on the ground and local populations, as opposed to something just for you to retire and call it a day and live like you're living in the US, maybe better, in Africa as sort of a vacation spot, which unfortunately some people do. But I recognize that you all are not about that life, and you all actually have the politics of solidarity in mind as well.
Absolutely.
Which I think, as you had mentioned, Abdus, this idea of African nations reconnecting with the diaspora and trying to form connections politically as well. That's super important. And I know that you all recognize that. So with that said, it was so great to speak to you all. I really appreciate you taking the time on a Saturday in the summer when you could be out doing stuff. Even I know you'd have to wear masks and gloves and all that, but you could be outside doing something a lot more fun than talking to me. So I appreciate the time that you took to talk to me. And I just wanted to ask if you all could share the best ways for people to get in touch with you or to check out your content.
You can find us on Facebook by searching under Luqman Nation, LuqMannation, where our page is called Coffee, Current Events, and Politics in Luqman Nation, but usually it comes up if you search just under Luqman Nation. You can also, find us on Patreon, where we have special patron content, as well as regular content, the monologues that I do on By Any Means Necessary. I share them there. We share a whole bunch of other stuff. We're on Patreon at patreon.com/Luqman Nation, LuqMannation. We are also on YouTube. You can find us there by searching Luqman Nation. And every day, and we still pinch ourselves that every day we get to broadcast on By Any Means Necessary on Sputnik Radio. You can hear those podcasts on Spreaker, iHeartRadio, iTunes, and I'm missing one. I cannot remember all of them.
It's anywhere you can find podcasts, I think.
Anywhere you can find a podcast, you can find By Any Means Necessary on Radio Sputnik. You can also go to the Facebook page for Sputnik and check us out live. And also, I do segments for the Real News Network. I've got a segment coming out in the next couple of days, which I think is really important, that talks about the history of the secret police and why what's going on in Portland isn't new. So you can check out our content on the Real News Network's YouTube page and Facebook page. So yeah, did I miss anything, Abdus?
No, I think that's it.
And you're on Twitter too, right? You're not as active on Twitter, right?
Yes, we are on Twitter. but I hate Twitter.
Oh.
We're on Twitter, and because Twitter takes up so much of you go in, it's like going to Costco. You mean to go in for like a pack of chicken. You swear you're just going to get a pack of chicken. 4 hours and $787 later. So yes, we are on Twitter though. Luqman Nation 1. Luqman Nation 1 on Twitter.
Is there a Luqman Nation without the one somehow?
I don't think so.
Okay, I was like,
I don't think so either.
If there is, I better look.
Right.
Yes, so make sure you include the one.
But we did say that we were going to be more active with our Twitter account. So yeah. So look for more tweets from us.
Yeah, I always liken Twitter to sort of a mosh pit, right? So
yeah,
sometimes you want to go in just to dance and you end up fighting your way out of it.
Yeah, and I'm too old for the mosh pit anymore. So.
Well, listen, it was great talking to you both. Thank you so much for joining the Left Pocket Project, obviously.
Thanks for having us.
And thank you for listening to the Left Pocket Project podcast. Of course, as a reminder, you can always find us by typing the word Left POC, and that's LEFT POC on Google. That will take you to wherever we are on Facebook, SoundCloud, Twitter, blah, 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 blah. But most important of all, I want you to check out our Patreon page, and that's patreon.com/leftpoc, LEFTPOC, of course. There you can find all of our episodes for free, in addition to, of course, wherever you find all of your podcasts, because we're there as well. But you can find all of our podcast episodes there for free. We don't believe in having a paywall. There's also information about the origins of the podcast, books and readings you can have for free. You can check out our Reading Revolution series, and of course we always post the books there for free as well. And I'd also say check it out if you're interested in donating $1 or more per month. You help keep our podcast and project afloat. We don't take any corporate donations or outside money. All of our money comes from our listeners, and we put all of our money back into the podcast, paying our guests. Of course, we always give our guests a small remuneration and donate to the organization of their choice. And of course, I pay assistants and Richard, and we pay for web storage and things like that. So definitely please donate if you can, to keep us afloat and to help us keep everything free as always. So with that said, thank you all so much again for listening. Please be safe out there. Do whatever you need to do to protect yourself, your family, and your friends. We need more of you. Trust me on this. We need more, not less. So please take care of yourselves, and have a good one.